Welcome back to the So What Show, guys. Today, we are coming out of the destruction of Black civilization. Great issues of a race from 4500 BC to 2000 AD by Chancellor Williams. Need to start making some movies out of this. All right? Call yourself a Black what you say, director or producer. You ain't came out and made no Egyptian movie, man. You ain't made none of the Chancellor Williams stuff, a movie of Black history on some of my great leaders. I can't call you a Black producer yet, man. Not me. Let's keep on going. So we coming out of chapter 1. You can go on at this time, hit that like button, share button, and hit that notification bell at the top for future reference, preferably the one with the ring around it. And we're about to dive in deep. All right. Yeah, this is our immaculate city before cities, the lifestyle we live. You know what I'm saying? You want to see, look at it. Check it out. Mm-hmm. I don't know where they come with that savage, like we lived in some caves or something. That don't look like no cave, huh? That was for vegetation right there. What you know about that? Let's get to going. Chapter 1, the overview. The land of the Blacks was a vast land, a big world, until its self-covering 12 million square miles. From its northernmost point in what is now Tunisia to Cape Aquahas to approximately 5,000 miles. Let's look this up. We're going on in. I'm gonna go on and get up in here. All right. Now, Tunisia. Okay. Tunisia. From its northernmost point and what is now Tunisia. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? Tunisia. That's the northern part. We built all these castles. You didn't know it. Black folks built them castles. Mm-hmm. Still got some of that stuff up there, see? Tunisia. To the northerns of Tunisia to Cape Aquilus. Take out the cape now, keep the cape in there. Aquilus. Cape Aquilus. Just look at it, look at it. Still look beautiful. Mm-hmm. You're right. You're right. Okay, yeah, look at that. Shores, to the shores, baby. To the shoreline. Let's look it up. Right there. Mm-hmm. Down there. Let's look at the other one on the map. Get it. Up there. Way up there. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is approximately 5,000 miles. And in its widest extent from east to west, it is 4,600 miles. The whole of this second largest continent was once Balad as Sudan, the land of the blacks. The land of the blacks. Okay. And not just the southern region, to which they had been steadily pushed from the north. After Asian, Greek, and Roman occupations, the term Sudan came to indicate the areas not yet taken from the blacks, and was coextensive with the European Empire. From the Ethiopian Empire. Ethiopian. Ethiopian Empire. Looking at the empire on TV. Look at the Ethiopian Empire. Okay. For the Ethiopian Empire once extended from the Mediterranean north and southward to the source of the Nile in the country Abyssinia, which recently reverted. It's interesting, Abyssinia. Got me thinking what may be there. Which recently reverted to the ancient name of the Ethiopian Empire, of which is in earlier times, it formed its southeastern provinces, even as late as the times of Menes, 3100 BC. Menes. Okay? Menes. Ethiopia still included 3/4 of Egypt, or up to 29 degrees north parallel. Okay? Parallel. The Asians held the Delta region, hence the two lands. Well known to all historians, but never fully explained. To explain the two lands, of course, would blast the myth about the builders of Egyptian civilization. It was pointed out that the study of the blacks must begin in Egypt. Okay. Egypt. Because most of their indestructible moments are there. And further, because many of the artifacts archaeologists have been uncovering during the past 75 years as Egyptian are in fact African. Yet the very heartland of the race and the cradle of civilization were actually further south, below the first cataract, centered around the capital cities of Napata. You ever been to Napata? Napata and Miro. Miro. From there, Black civilization spread north, reaching its most spectacular achievements in what became known as Egyptian civilization. The general condition of vast stretches of uninhabited and uninhabitable land over the continent seemed to support the Western thesis that Africans never developed any worthwhile civilization with a notable historic past. The more charitable might add that in the very nature of their situation, it could not have been otherwise. Samuel Baker went far in promoting the ideal of African innate inferiority, even if he had to use the most forbidden area in Africa to do it. Samuel Baker. Okay. Even if he had to use the most forbidden area in Africa to do it. The terrible swamplands of the Sud. The Sud. Okay? An area south of Khartoum. That, in its full extent, is as big as England. No one would claim that any kind of society, civilized or savage, could exist in the Sud swamplands, probably the largest in the world. Okay? Okay? For it was neither all land nor water, but a seemingly endless mass of rotting vegetation, interwoven tree-like vines, steaming heat, swarming man-killing mosquitoes, crocodiles, hippos, and other unknown forms of tropical life. The conclusion of Baker and others was that they were in a land where time had stood still since its beginning, where life never advanced, and the human species has simply rotated in aimless cycles like the animal life in the Sud. As late as the 1840s and 50s, these explorers, even the most ignorant, should have known that in the same vast continent of wastelands, tropical rainforests, and swamplands, there were also areas of arable land and civilized states. But they wrote about what they saw the most of: vast stretches of wasteland and secluded groups of strange people. But as we shall see, some of the great kingdoms and empire builders in Africa seem not to have known the meaning of failure or to have any ideas about surrendering to fate. Ejected here, they led the people there and began to build again. Wherever the splintered off refugee groups found a place, where the soil seemed favorable for cultivation and the land unoccupied by preceding migrants, they settled and began to build villages again. And since a sense of relative security was a necessary factor in deciding where to begin a new settlement. A crucial question was, how many miles had they put between the slave hunters and themselves? How many? For the kind of houses and community buildings they would erect depending directly on the probability of permanent settlement or sudden flight again. In short, they could build large, sturdy and attractive compound homes and temples of worship, or easily demolish huts. Now you see why the huts. Don't come and tear it down anyway. He gonna come break it down anyway. He don't want us to build nothing anyway. He gonna come bust nose off of it anyway. It was for reasons of security that so many of these groups, later called tribes or societies, sought the most hidden and isolated areas they could find. This permanent separation from their kinsmen and other groups were generally quite contrary to their heart's desires. The original splintering off and parting was often done in tears. But breaking up into smaller units seemed to be the only route to survival in a permanent crisis situation. Apparently, permanent, since the movement of people over the continent had been going on so far beyond the memory of each generation that migration and temporary settlements were among the most significant facts in the oral tradition of each society. Fragmentation and isolation had two momentous consequences. The first was that the isolation of various groups led to the development of over 2,000 different dialects and languages. The second fateful outcome was that the rise of all these tongues widened the gulf between the blacks that territorial distances had already achieved. One should pause here for reflection if there is any serious attempt to really understand what happened to the African people and why. For even without the aid of Western writers in emphasizing the language differences and the cultural variations and attempting to show how unrelated the blacks were, they in time came to consider themselves unique, with each society not only independent of the other, but independent of its enemy, if only potentially. This uniting and mutual suspicion became an African way of life. Small chiefdoms sprang up everywhere, often no more than a village of 100 or 200 people. Africa, therefore, presented itself to Asia and Europe as the ideal land for exportation, enslavement, and conquest. You have them speaking French. Europe then took over parts. Asia then took over parts. Colonizing to this day. The history is complex and many-sided, and would be so if we were discussing just one nation and not an entire continent. This is why our focus must be on the main lines of development. The African-wide aspects and the unmistakable common origin and continent-wide sameness of basic institutions which these universal aspects reflect. A United States of Africa. There were then different outcomes for different societies. Some perished, even to the last member from disease, like some of these natives over here. Starvation or warfare. Others despairing of ever again being able to have a fixed abode, like a lot of Black people here today. Don't know if you're gonna live next month, next check, next rent. You're still on the run, ain't you? Became nomads. Some, although isolated so long that they had developed different languages and customs, had nevertheless decided that salvation required a union with other groups. These were the tribes that merged with other tribes, lost their separate identity and languages, and who evolved from the process a single common language, larger and larger chiefdoms, kingdoms, and finally empires that began to birth of their long lost civilization. We have people today don't even know their great-great-grandpa, name, face, where he was born, who he married, who his family was. Today, I don't want to hear it. You ain't solved nothing. You're guilty. And you in judgment today, like it or not. Don't talk about Blacks. Show your faith. Faith without works is what? Dead. Don't want to hear. The fiercest wars between the Blacks occurred in the founding and expansion of new kingdoms and empires. For while the core groups were voluntary confederations, expansion of an empire required the conquest of neighboring states, usually small, independent chieftains that preferred to maintain their absolute sovereignty. Sovereignty. The repercussions from this forced unity by conquest were to shake the continent from end to end. Twerking it, baby. They was twerking the whole state of Africa. Had it shaking. Every inch. Twerking it. Going to represent silly. Later, when European political rule ended, modern Africans and students of Africa have tended to emphasize the destructive impact of European imperialism in Africa while ignoring the most damaging developments from the Arab impact before. The general European takeover in the last quarter of the 19th century, a relatively recent period. Arabs had it, first, second, and third quarter. We win it, baby, we win it, baby, we win it. We got it all the way to the third quarter. Move out the way, I got this. Want it, but we won it. We winning now, baby. See here. This point is important. For one of the most remarkable chapters in the history of the Blacks is that dealing with those dauntless lenders and people, dauntless. I'm gonna look up dauntless. I know what dauntless is. I want you to hear what he said. He called them dauntless. Dauntless leaders. Dauntless. Think about it. Adjective, showing fearlessness and determination. Who look like that today? Showing fearlessness and determination out here on the streets to you, to us as Black folks. Showing fearlessness and determination. Fearless, determined, resolute, indomitable, intrepid, doughty, plucky, spirited, game, mettlesome, gritty, steely, confident, undaunted, undismayed, unalarmed, unflinching, unshrinking, unabashed, unfaltering, unflagging, bold, audacity. Well, I say audacity. Audacious, valiant. So what you think we need to balance that? Fearless, determined, resolute, indomitable, intrepid, doughty, plucky, spirited, game, mettlesome, gritty, steely, confident, undaunted, dismayed, undismayed, unalarmed, unflinching, unshrinking, abashed, unflattering, unflagging, bold, audacious, valiant, youth, elders. Well, sit your tail down and watch God at work. Your coon tail. Let's get back to it. One of the most remarkable chapters in the history of the Blacks is that dealing with those dauntless leaders and people who, having lost one state after another, along with 3/4 of their kinsmen, nevertheless overrode all the forces of destruction and death and began to build, always, once again, still another state. From the earliest times, the elimination of these states as independent African sovereignties had been an Asian objective. Stepped by Muslim onslaughts after the 17th century AD. So the reestablished Black states were still being conquered and Islamized when Europeans began to rise in great numbers to impose their rule over both Asians and Africans. The big thing that happened here, to repeat, is generally glossed over, ignored, or forgotten. The last being a pretension since a historical development of this magnitude could hardly be forgotten by serious writers on Africa. For what happened? Very simple. Was that European imperialism in Africa checked and replaced Arab imperialism. Check that tail. I'm checking you. This is checkmate. Get the hell out of the way. The Arabs' screams against Western imperialism are the screams of outrage against Western imperialists for checking and subduing Eastern imperialists in the very midst of the Blacks they had conquered. There are still countless thousands of Blacks who are naive enough to believe that the Arabs' bitter attack on Western colonism show their common cause with Black America. Common cause. Let's look that up. Common. figured. Oh, it ain't even no word. It must be a typo or something. Common cause with Black Africa. That's what I'm thinking. But we spotted it. Their egos got it. Let's keep going. Insofar as those who were fortunate enough to find promising areas for settlement are concerned, the picture was generally one of state building and the revival of basic African institutions, which, though not forgotten, could neither be maintained nor developed by any people forever on the move. What about the countless societies fleeing before the conquering hordes? The fleeing hordes, a large group of people, an army or tribe of nomadic warriors, a loosely knit small social group typically consisting of about 5 families. Had them on the run, 5 families, huh? Then they hit home. Ugh. Oh boy. Okay, I know I marked it right. Maybe I didn't. I went straight to it. Fleeing before the conquering hordes and the enslavers, as well as famine and the deaths which were their daily companion. What about those who found no promised land anywhere? What about them? We couldn't get no promised land over here. They ain't promised us no land. They ain't promised us no land. They ain't promised us no land. They ain't got no promised land, even though it was their land. What about it? For quite unlike the societies I mentioned that could settle down and had the opportunity to start and develop civilization comparable to any elsewhere in the world at the time, these people could neither settle down nor therefore develop a civilization. Always on the run, always pursuing. What they suffered from year to year as they wandered over the continent is almost beyond both description and belief. Always want to take advantage of us. Don't want to give us no land. In fact, while the story is well known, few writers would want to go into its awful details. Suffice to say at this point that here, then, were numerous societies of Africans that were virtually sentenced either to death from starvation or enslavement by Arabs. I'm still in the pre-European period, or barbarism and savagery, and in many cases, even cannibalism. Under such conditions, and the Arabs was really mixed, black and white. They didn't want the black. Even though you're my great-grandfather and great-grandma, I'm gonna starve you to death, or I'm gonna put you to death, or I'm gonna put you to work, grandpa. What they suffered from year to year as they wandered over the continent is almost beyond both description and belief. In fact, while the story is well known, few writers would want to go into its awful details. Suffice to say at this point that here, then, were numerous societies of Africans that were virtually sentenced either to death from starvation or enslavement by Arabs. I am still in the pre-European period, or barbarism and savagery, and in many cases, even cannibalism, meaning eating other people. Under such conditions, I would defend not only, come on in, we're gonna eat you up. God. Come on in, guess what we got for dinner today? What, you? I got some promised land for you. Under such conditions, I would defend not only the retrogression or these people to barbarism, but to cannibalism itself. The defense of the latter is easy, since it has been well established that other supposedly highly civilized men will revert to savagery and cannibalism under prolonged conditions of extreme hunger and thirst, when survival itself was the only question that dominates the human mind. They turned in on each other. We didn't do it, man. It wasn't us. It wasn't us. It was them eating each other, you see. That's where it first started. We were starving to death. They like, look, Tuto, you about to die anyway. So that we could go and lay down. Went to slicing on Tuto. Messed up. Turned them savage. Ain't that interesting? Starving them to death. Ain't that interesting? Revert to savagery and cannibalism under prolonged conditions of extreme hunger and thirst, when survival itself was the only question that dominates the human mind. This phenomenon of reverting to a state of savagery and even cannibalism under extreme conditions of starvation is known to occur universally among various peoples: white, brown, red, or yellow. The facts we have then show that after they lost Egypt and the Eastern Sudan, well, I wouldn't want to be in a starving community where certain people can't even go a goddamn couple of days without eating. Well, you're gonna be somebody meat real quick. So prepare yourselves. The facts we have then show that after they lost Egypt and the Eastern Sudan, some Africans, overriding all adverse conditions, grouped themselves to form nations and developed a high order of civilization, independent of any external influences. Don't be around too many of them meat lovers too long. You better start surrounding yourself. Better get you around a community of meat lovers. You may become the meat. Others never settled anywhere long enough to develop anything notable, but seem to remain in a state of liturgy. Let's look it up. Liturgy. Lethargy, a lack of energy and enthusiasm. Synonyms: sluggishness, inertia, inactivity, inaction, slowness, torpor, tepidity, lifelessness, dulness, listlessness, languor, languidness, stagnation, dormancy, laziness, a pathological state of sleepiness or deep unresponsiveness and inactivity. Sound like a coma to me. Okay, but seem to remain in a state of lethargy or suspended animation. They had surrendered to fate. They was in a sunken place. They had surrendered to fate and became too weak to fight back. They descended to a state of semi-barbarianism. Descended. Because most of these societies had known better times and a higher order of life. Some, in more favorable circumstances, nevertheless, failed to advance. Still others were in the class discussed in connection with cannibalism, hunger-crazed people who had sunk to the lowest levels of dog existence. These last are the people about whom European and American authors delight to write. No cartoon are better known than those showing a sweating white man, usually an explorer or missionary, being cooked in a huge black pot, while black savages dance around with human bones decorating their heads or stuck through pierced noses. You know what that looked like. I'm gonna just watch this African cartoon. Show how much they still on it. Let's see. Oh, maybe a little better. Let's see. All the images. Oh, no, not too much. Still gotta put them in there, you know. We still gotta put them in there, Lando. We ain't got, you get that out of here. Yeah, you get that out of here, man. Talking about something like this. See? The idea these experts on Africa have been planting and still actively plant to this day in the minds of the peoples of the world is that this is Africa. And these are the savages who are now clamoring for independence. Nature joins the attack. Nature joins the attack. The question of psychology, vegetation, climate, water, and soil are all more crucial in the history of the blacks than they are in the case of any other people. For here a whole continent is involved, and on that continent are people who, in one period of time, were among the foremost people on earth. And in a later period, the farthest behind. Nature itself set an environmental stage in a manner and under conditions which appear to have been designed to test to the utmost one race's morale, intellectual, and physical powers to override all obstacles to survival. The slow but relentless, steady withdrawal of inhabitable land over the centuries eventually left Africa a land of desolation, a wasteland. What did President Trump say? toilet, the greater part of which was desert and treeless grassland with only a fractional part, about 10%, with the much needed forests and thickets. But we know that's a lot today because there's a lot popping off over there in Africa. You see them over there trying to get in. It can't be too much of a toilet. You sure trying to put your face up in it. Even the continental land configuration was against its native inhabitants, like a vast inclined plane. The highlands, beginning in Central Africa at 3,000 feet above sea level, rose southward to higher and higher levels, reaching the highest level of 15,000 feet in the southeastern provinces of the ancient Ethiopian Empire. This caused Africa to slope northward, and its principal, the Nile in particular, to flow in the same direction. This single circumstance causes the blacks to lose the very earliest centers of their civilization and the heartland of the race. Egypt and the southern area that was later called the Sudan, or land of the blacks, just as though Egypt itself was not also formerly the land of the blacks. The Sudan. Okay. For the greatest of their rivers, the Nile, played still another tragic joke on its people. This river, the longest in the world, flows 4,127 miles across Africa from Lake Nazareth. Let's go to Lake Nazareth. Nazareth. Okay. Lake Nazareth. What the heck that is? See it in there? Nope. I don't see it. Let's keep rolling. Don't look to be in there either. Oh, there it is. All right, there you go. Bam. To the Mediterranean. You know what that's at. Yet, not until it reaches Aswan, and begins its last stretch of 750 miles to the sea, does it overflow to further enrich 13,500 square miles of already fertile soil. It's like a fertile woman. Baby just pop out, just touch it. Square miles of already fertile soil in Egypt. For its 3,377 miles through the heart of Black Africa. the Nile sank as it cut deep canyons in its soft limestone flow, leaving cliffs at places from a few hundred to 1,000 feet high. What this means is that for over 3,000 miles through the eastern side of the continent, the Nile was collecting the rich soil carried to it by the heavy rains and 1,000 tributary streams. These flow into the mother of rivers and add to the enrichment of its waters flowing northward, guarded all the way by her deep channels until it reaches the hard sandstone bottom above Awesome, and then begins its periodic overflow the rest of the way to the sea. Here, a natural phenomenon cheated the Africans in a big way that was to have dire consequences. There could be no black daughter of the Nile. Observe Parsons in his streams of history for the Nile in making Upper Ethiopia, Egypt, so rich in food production that it became world famous, not only as the breadbasket of the world, but also for its highly advanced civilization, stirred the envy of Asia and Europe, from which continents migrants began to settle. Even in this, the physical geography of Africa was favorable to the peaceful settlers who later were to become its conquerors and rulers. For the seacoast is lowland everywhere, not more than 500 feet above sea level, and remains lowland 500 miles inland. Asian and European occupation of the seacoast of North Africa and East Africa was, therefore, relatively easy. It's easy, baby. And probably even welcomed at first by the blacks as co-partners in the world trade. But the poor and hungry nomads from the vast desert areas of the Middle East poured into the most fertile and easily accessible areas of this other land of deserts that is North Africa. Let's look up the nomads. Came on in. Boys are back in town. Came on in. There were several consequences of the greatest historical importance, which are generally not sufficiently stressed. The first was that both the Saharan transformation and the steady incursion of Asian pressured more and more blacks back into the interior to concentrate in the already limited survival areas, were just to subsist was a daily struggle. Y'all get back. Y'all get back. Get back. You get back. You get back. The second important result was the widespread amalgamation of the races. Amalgamation of the races. Let's look that up. Al. Amalgamation. Okay. Like mixing the meat, putting together. It look like to me. Let's define it. The action, process, or result of combining or uniting. Synonyms: combination, union, merger, blend, mixture, mingling, compound, fusion, marriage, weave, coalliances, synthesis, composite, composition, concoction, amalgam, mash up. Okay. For the weaker, more submissive blacks remain in Asian occupied territory to become slave laborers and slave soldiers and to witness a ruthless sexual traffic in black women. Sexual, they was trafficking then with the black women. Nothing new. Trafficking you. After you come down, we descended you. We've been trafficking you ever since, till today. Right, Billy Bob? That's right. Sexual trafficking in black women that gave rise to a new breed of Afro-Asians. Afro-Asians. These were classed as Caucasians or Asians. They themselves bitterly objected to being identified with the race of their mothers, African. I'm not African. I'm not African. When these later became known as Egyptians in Egypt, Moors in Morocco, and Mauritanians or Carthaginians in Carthage, Tunis. Let's look that up. We're not claiming blacks. I am not black. But seen one other day over there, look, he blacker than me talking about I ain't black. I'm not African. From an interview back in the day. Negro, please. Somebody slap this nigga black. Moors in Morocco and Mauritanians or Carthaginians in Carthage, Tunis. Okay? Tunis. Great care. I met a Morocco up there in Maine. Interesting. He helped me, but he barely helped me. He did the bare minimum. I can't do as much. I don't know if he could or not, but yeah. Morocco, right there on the edge of Africa, as he said, and I looked it up. Great care, right where the hurricanes come over here too. Great care was taken to distinguish them from African in daily intercourse, in paintings and in documentary literature. This new breed, half African, was to join with their Asian fathers and forefathers in the wars and enslaving raids against the blacks
that went on century after century until all North Africa was eventually taken, like the movie, taken. Still another fateful geographical factor that favored the invaders has been implied or partly stated in the foregoing observations. Aside from the easy occupation of the lowlands of the seacoast and the gradual taking over of the rich lands of the Nile Valley and its ancient civilization, both Asians and Europeans found the highlands of southern and eastern Africa more pleasant and healthier for Caucasian settlement. Take this down here. This meant that even after nature had damned 3/4 of the continent's land mass as impossible to support human life, the Asians and Europeans came in to seize and hold the best of 1/4 that was left. The blacks found themselves cut off from all seacoasts that then mattered, hemmed in from all directions, and confined within narrower and narrower limits. Thus they became a wandering people, forever migrating in their own vast homeland, fragmenting from great United Nations into countless little splinter societies, becoming so isolated from each other that each formed a new language of its own, considering themselves quite different from their original brothers, who were then regarded as strangers and enemies in the endless tribal wars that ensued over the habitual land. The land over which these struggles took place varied in different regions. So did the climate that so greatly affected it, the people, and even some of their institutions varied under environmental influences. The land mass in the eastern regions, for example, has been undergoing a vertical movement of elevation, a sinking and leveling process occasioned by the atmosphere and weathering since Miocene times. Miocene time. Look that up. There. Mayo. That's what it sound like. Miocene times. Miocene times, okay? The Miocene times. Geologists trace the elevation of the mountains in the area, including Kilimanjaro. Just because it said Kilimanjaro, I gotta look that up. Kilimanjaro. All right. Most times that's about what you see on the movies. Kilimanjaro and the faulting and fracturing that created the Great Rift to early volcanic activity. In the arid and semi-arid regions, there are vast stretches of desolate land which were not made so by nature alone? For like the Sahara itself, much of it was once woodland, where animal life flourished and streams flowed. Man played the leading role in the destruction by the use of fire and his shifting farm methods. Animals also helped in the process. The relation of green grass and forest to climate and climate to rainfall seems not to have been known or fully appreciated. The treeless and grassless areas, the periodic rains evaporate into non-water holding earth. One may travel hundreds of miles over regions of this kind without finding a single stream. I want to go to naked and wild on that one. Naked and scared, right? Whatever you call it. All rivers and streams have disappeared, like the raindrops in the sand, because the same physical characteristics of the land previously discussed. Irrigation was extremely difficult, and in most places impossible outside of Egypt. We have spoken so much about African deserts of sand and rocks that one might be misled into thinking that it was this kind of land alone that could not support a population. But there were vast non-desert areas of hard red and red-brown soil that had been leached by heavy rainfall, robbed of its essential elements for vegetation, such as calcium and phosphorus, and of course, its once rich humus of topsoil. This continuous weathering was obviously destructive. Or you think they're getting all this stuff for these crystals and things for these computers? Very rich over there. The soil problem was further aggravated by having underneath floors of hard laterite elements, just as though there was a master plan to guarantee that this soil would not hold any water. Therefore, the problem involved far more than restoring topsoil, and a land conservation program to prevent erosion, because the hard flow underneath drained away the rainfall as fast as it reached that level. No corner or scrap of land in Africa has escaped hunger, says Jose de Castro in his Geography of Hunger. This is a continent of the starving, all of it. And in hunger and chronic malnutrition may be found one of the most decisive reasons for the backwardness of Africa, for the relative stagnation and lassitude of the greater part of his people. Let's look this man up. He has something to say when others wouldn't sing it. Jesse de Castro. Ain't nobody else gonna say it, I'm gonna say it. You can like it or not. I'm gonna say it. But the Garden of Eden areas must not be overlooked when we are considering the general overall conditions. These are areas which, while not comparable to the rich floodplains of the Nile Valley and Delta, have unfertilized soil that nevertheless produced a surprisingly rapid growth of abundant vegetation and a heavy concentration of animal and bird life. These are the areas where fruits and nuts of many varieties grow in abundance without the aid of man. Without these areas of salvation here and there over the continent, along with pastoral grazing land, the blacks as a race would have doubtlessly perished from the earth. They almost did. The trend once seemed to be definitely in the direction of extinction. Even if we dismiss accounts of planned mass extermination by their enemies as unreliable, too many other threats to survival remain to darken every ray of hope. Disease was everywhere. The offspring of distress, privation, hunger, and malnutrition. It spread over the land as advanced scouts for death. Over half of Africa's babies were either born dead or dead soon after birth. Old age was between 40 and 50 years. 3/4 of the people, as even today, are still weakened by malnutrition and malarial water. Don't fear though, it's a new day coming. And a number of diseases that are largely traceable to these two causes. Berry, don't cry today. Pellagra, be happy today. Scurvy, you empowered today. And even leprosy. The scourge of childhood is kwashiorkor, or malignant malnutrition. Never heard that before. Let's look that up. Gave it a name. Plowski. Maybe like, can you send $5 a week for the babies? As if they really trying, yeah, put them in the condition. What the hell? Can you help the babies I put in this position? Give me your money too. Oh my God. This accelerated depopulation of the black man's countries resulting from the nature of soil and climate, mass enslavement, deaths in resisting slavery, wars of conquest, intertribal conflicts, exaltation from endless flights and migration, and ever-present disease. All this reduced the black population by 3/4. Do you hear me? 3/4. Packed on top of pack on top of pack, pack, death. Under reasonable, favorable conditions, the African population today will be 4 times its present number. And when it is pointed out that 3/4 of the people today are still weakened by malaria and malnutrition, reference is made to the 1/4 of the people who survived in spite of it all. Oh, don't worry about it. They survived last time, didn't they? How, then, were the blacks able to battle invading enemies from one end of the continent to the other for several thousand years? True, they were overcome in the end. But what sustained them through all those centuries of struggle on so many different fronts and against so many different kinds of enemies? Weakened so generally by both disease and what became perpetual hunger, whence came their strength and courage to carry on. It may well be the answers lie in the death-defying pyramids they built in Egypt when the land was theirs. Precondition for progress. Preconditions for progress. There must be a number of preconditions without which the genius of any people for thinking, inventing, discovering, and building will be inhabited or eventually die under extreme circumstances. A few of these preconditions for progress are: 1, the people must become famine-free and able to settle down and end their perennial roaming from place to place in search of food and water. 2, finding suitable territory. The leaders must proceed through negotiations with other neighboring societies and fragmented groups to nation building. 3, a crucial precondition. There must be developed a sense of national community among the various language groups that make up the country. This is so important that it cannot be left to wishful thinking or chance. It must be programmed in such a way that a sense of loyalty and of being an important part of a great united brotherhood, sisterhood, which is the nation itself, will develop naturally and allow. 4, a strong army for defense. And 5, the reign of law and justice to apply equally to all classes in the society. The people must feel absolutely secure as individuals. That is their country. There is equal justice for all. That in their country is equal justice for all. In short, certain conditions in a country can bring about that internal peace, stability, and confidence which unshackle the mind. There is now time to think. Now time to think. There is now time to think. No more tricking with bleeding feet for hundreds of miles across rocky deserts. No more seeing your kinsmen fall out to welcome death along the way. A home at last, better farms, plenty of food, and now, time to think. Time to think. There is nothing mystical about the reasons why one group of people can easily become physically and mentally strong while another becomes physically weak and less mentally alert. An abundance of nutrition, food, and pure drinking water may spell the difference between advance and decay. The number of death-dealing diseases developing from malnutrition alone is alarming. But what should be stressed above everything else is that millions of babies may become both physically and mentally retarded by disease while in their mother's wombs, which is another way of saying that a people wholly ignorant or indifferent to basic health can themselves become inferior in fact. But even this central fact, when fully realized, will still remain in the field of mere discussion until Blacks everywhere begin mass organization for mass education for the masses. The system is so structured worldwide that Blacks are forced into conditions that can even lead to genetic inferiority. There must be a breakthrough or there will be gradual extinction. This is the final precondition for survival and advancement. Your attention is called again to the map of Africa. Let's take them back. Okay. For it is very significant where the earliest invaders entered and permanently settled. They took over the areas of trade that allowed easy contact with their homeland and the other nations of the world. This is a point that simply cannot be overstressed in considering the plight of the African people. In the north, they settled around the Mediterranean, thereby maintaining contact with Europe and Asia. In the northeast, east, and south, they settled along the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean, thereby keeping in touch with their homeland and the trade countries farther away. Black Africa was thus hemmed in and effectively cut off, commercially and otherwise, from the rest of the world. The techniques of penetration and dominance were buried. Some came as peaceful traders, and doubtless trade was all that was intended by many. Africans were always eager traders. The main attraction of foreign traders was that they brought in many new kinds of commodities. These traders had little or no trouble in gaining coastal footholds as trading posts. The land was not sold, but leased. However, the Blacks had what the world wanted most. Gold. I'm gonna put these up. You can see this to the day. Gold. Look at it. Gold. Gold. Where's my precious gold? What else? And these is what the families control. The elite families. What else? Shine like a diamond. Shine like a diamond. What else? Ivory. Take all your ivory. I'll take that too. Give me that. Yep, I appreciate it. Give me that too. What else? Add it up. What else? Give me all the copper for electricity. Yeah, I'll take that too. Make me some electrical parts. What else? Africa. Give me all your iron too, yeah, for war and machinery. Yeah, so I'm gonna make sure you don't know how to make no machines no more. What else? The ore. Give me all the ore. Yeah, give me that too. What is ore used for? What is ore used for? They wanted it so bad. Ore is a deposit in the earth's crust of one or more valuable minerals. The most valuable ore deposits contain metals crucial to industry and trade, like copper, gold, and iron. Copper ore is mined for a variety of industrial uses. Copper, an excellent conductor of electricity, is used as electrical wire. Gold is the best. What else? What else? And themselves. The trading posts soon became strong fortifications around which villages and towns sprang up as settlers from Asia poured in and armed forces became organized. The Africans watched these developments with increasing apprehension, for the traders were often armed with superior and different types of weapons of war and spent much time in training recruits, including Africans. Indeed, in some areas, a definite pattern emerged. In all African army under Asian officers, a pattern to be followed later by the Europeans. This was easy enough for the Arabs. They owned and captured Africans who made up their fighting forces. The Africans could blame only themselves for this. Here, as in certain other things, they were still engaged in practices which, while once universal, had long since been dying out or generally abandoned by the rest of the world. This one was the enslavement of captured prisoners of war. When African chiefs and kings began to sell these to slave-hungry Arabs, "Get out, you got any more of them slaves over there for me?" King. They set in motion a chain of events that was to undermine the civilizations of the most advanced societies on the continent, further checking their progress and degrading their whole race for another 2,000 years, when the sale of their fellows became the chief source of wealth. African leaders became increasingly estranged from the finest thing to African life, the sense of community and of kinship with all who would be friends. When greed severed the traditional ties of brotherhood, the gradual movement of the invaders from the coastal areas inland became relatively easy. Blacks against blacks, to this day, with increasing suspicion and hatred, may be traced to the Africans' own slave raids. The inland raids for slaves were resisted by some chiefs, and the raiders were attacked. But this opposition was not always due to any opposition to slavery, but to this kind of direct action which bypassed the chiefs and thereby eliminated their profits. The conquest of the blacks by religion. Okay? And then I'm gonna let you go. The conquest of the blacks by religion. Got to go into this. Okay? Let's go. Other invaders found penetration easy under the banners of religion. Full advantage was taken of the fact that Africans are a very religious people. Did you hear that? You are a religious people. For you slow folks. First came the crescent flag of the prophet, The Islamic advance was three pro-synthesizing missions claiming one brotherhood, widespread intermarriages, and concubinage with African women due to the Muslim system of polygamy. Let's just go to the black woman pictures, man. I don't think she really know how much of a part she's been playing in all this. This woman, right here, our woman. Polygamy, something like that. I know what it is. And forceful conversions at sword point. The cross of Jesus Christ followed the Muslim crescent. The cloak of Christianity was a most convenient hiding place for those who had other designs. Hence, the drive to convert. Conversions here meant far more than conversions to Christianity. As in the case of Islam, it meant change into the white man's image, his ideas and value system. The real object of worship turned out to be neither Jesus Christ nor his father God, but Western man and Western civilization. Christian brotherhood. Well, yes, in principle. Or to be practical, you blacks can have all the Christian brotherhood you desire among yourselves. Apartheid was Africa wide under colonialism and not a particularity of the South African system, as so many are led to think. But what happened in the process of converting the blacks to Islam and Christianity was the supreme triumph of the white world over the black? Millions of Africans became non-African Africans. Africans who were neither Muslim nor Christians were classed as pagans. And therefore neither Muslims nor Christians were classed as pagans, and therefore required to disavow their whole culture and to regard practically all African institutions as backwards or savage. Institutions as backwards or savage. That's AS. But I said it like that for the purpose. The blacks in their own right became non-persons, members of a race of nobodies, so hopeless that self-realization as personalities, even in the subordinate status, could only be achieved by becoming Muslims or Christians. Indeed, in order to destroy completely not only their African heritage, but also their very African identity psychologically, they were forced to change their names to Arabic and Christian names. You're not Toby, you're Joseph. You're not Tutu, you Alamin. One. There were, however, numerous chiefs who not only opposed slavery, okay, but fought against it to the death. Let's get that known. Literally. Some were encircled and with their whole people died fighting the enslaver to the end. Let's keep that clear. Number two. The pattern of continent-wide segregated communities can be seen even today in independent African states and America.
You over there by yourself, and they ain't giving you nothing. They ain't got nothing for you. You hemmed in. They used to hem you in on one side of the tracks, huh? In the bottom, the black bottom. Okay. Henceforth, if these black emails, Johns, Muhammad's, Samuels, and Abdulus happen to achieve greatness in some field, the assumption would be that it was Caucasian achievement. Facts. Unless a special effort was made to identify the race of the persons in question. Blacks at home in Africa and blacks scattered over the world bore the names of their enslavers and oppressors, the ultimate in self-effacement that promoted a self-hatred which made pride in the race difficult. Facts. That these psychological shackles still handicap not only the rebirth of modern African states, but also blacks everywhere should be obvious to all. Facts. Now let's tap in. Finally, there were the invaders who apparently disdained the cloak of deception and came in fighting. Understand me? They had no problems. They knew in advance that they would find the Africans almost everywhere, unprepared to defend themselves against a well-organized, well-trained body of men, no matter how small. Understand me? The situation developed as splinter. Independent little states became more and more numerous. The use of secret agents seems to be as old as organized states. Understand me? For the practice of the sending spies as goodwill ambassadors, traders, and so on, well in advance into a country to be invaded, goes far back into antiquity. Those sent into Africa from various lands could report back that number one, the Africans were largely a peaceful people engaged in agriculture, mining trades, fishing, the arts, crafts of various kinds, and manufacturing such things as poetry, furniture, building materials, boats, weapons of war, so on. Okay? Number two, these settled states and their generally highly developed social and political systems indicate their advanced civilization. Number three, but they were ill prepared for war, except against their neighbors, who also used the kind of spears, bows, and arrows which we had abandoned long since. Okay? And you don't know about Shaka Zulu, he was one of them. You ain't getting nothing over here. We want your land. Europe come over there, we want your land. England, we want your land. You ain't getting no land over here. We going to war then with our spears. We gonna shock you when I get finished. You gonna understand why they call me Shaka. Number four, in general, they have no swiftly moving mounted soldiers. 100 of our dashing cavalrymen with firepower could put 10,000 of them to flight. Number five, they are a secretive people. For while they are fully aware of the great mineral wealth of the continent, they use it in a very limited way, mainly for personal adornment, and have no desire to open up to the foreigners for world commerce that would greatly benefit them. Accordingly, they rigidly limit their trading activities, but mainly because Asians
hold all of their seacoasts, and have them cut off from the world and its trade. Okay? I want y'all women to know that. He first teaches. Number 6, finally, the whole of Africa could, with a few exceptions, be progressively taken over simply by picking off one small state after another. For the overall pattern of the continent is one of countless small independent groups, each for itself and itself alone. There is no unity among them, even for a common defense. Since it is the first duty of each chief to protect his people, all seem to be too proud to seek unity with other chiefs, thinking this might indicate a sign of weakness and itself invite attack. Look like that on social media for some, with your ignorant selves. Therefore, it could have been truthfully reported to either Asia or Europe any time during the last 1,000 years that the widespread segmentation and attending disunity among the Africans made them easy to conquer and dominate. Some of these six hypothetical items will be valid as conclusions regarding the general situation only after the widespread collapse of strong African states, when small splinter states spread over the continent like an epidemic. Spread over the states like COVID or something. Not in Africa. Spread over like they spread over America. But as we shall see, the united resistance of the blacks to white Asian invasions had been going on before recorded history began. And despite all the segmentations and endless invasions from north, south, east, and west, there were black nations that kept up the resistance of 5,000 years right down into the 20th century. Come on, my island, we tearing up. We shall review some of these in the chapters which follow. That being stated, family, I hope you enjoyed education of us. And come back next time for the next episode. Hit that like button, share button, hit that notification bell at the top for the next episode. And the next episode will be chapter 2. Ethiopia's oldest daughter, Egypt. Ethiopia's oldest daughter, Egypt. Look at Egypt. Look at her. Look at her and all her beauty. Look at that. And came over there and just messed her all up. Turned her out and stealing, taking off of her and taking body parts and raped her and raped her and raped her again. Tragedy, man. She been traumatized. All right there, family. Till next time. Keep your heads up, stay focused.